At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's GeneralG. Let's begin. Zatric's hands trembled as his ship carried him toward the most distant of the human colonies. As the unwilling ambassador chosen to investigate how Earth so consistently won its wars with such speed, he could only hope the humans would keep their word and ensure his safety during his brief stay. After all, his species was not known for its durability or resilience in times of crisis. The Sibber people had never been warriors. Their evolutionary path on the swamp world of Sibberos had shaped them into beings of contemplation and harmony, not conflict. For millions of years, they had developed in the thick, humid marshlands where cooperation meant survival and aggression meant death in the treacherous bog waters. Their ancestors had learned that violence disturbed the delicate ecosystem they depended on. Ripples of conflict could attract predators. This pacifist nature had become encoded in their very DNA, passed down through countless generations until the mere thought of violence triggered physiological stress responses in modern Sibber. Zatric wore his flexible exoskeleton. The suit's internal systems constantly circulated a fine mist of mineral-rich water, maintaining the perfect humidity level his amphibious exterior required. His skin, a vibrant green covered in distinctive black spots, glistened beneath the transparent sections of his exosuit. The pattern was unique to each Sibber, like fingerprints to humans, though the humans rarely noticed such nuances. Instead, they had taken to calling it frog skin, a comparison that never failed to annoy him. The Earth amphibians they referenced were primitive creatures, lacking consciousness or civilization, yet humans seemed to find the comparison amusing rather than insulting. On any other day, their casual nature and tendency towards such comparisons would have been his primary source of frustration. Today, however, such concerns seemed trivial compared to the terror gripping his three-chambered heart. As he focused on his own accelerated heartbeat, the ship's AI spoke. "Ambassador Zatric, we have achieved safe landing at the human colonial plant. Local time is 0800 hours. Weather conditions are optimal. No hostile activity detected within a 50-kilometer radius. Please proceed with your mission." The words should have been reassuring. They weren't. Zatric remained frozen in his seat, his large yellow eyes fixed on the now open hatch. Beyond it lay an alien world, a human military installation, and worst of all, an active war zone. The AI had opened the hatch, and warm, dry air rushed in, making his skin tingle uncomfortably even through his suit's protection. "Ambassador Zatric," the AI prompted again, its tone unchanged. "Your scheduled liaison, Lieutenant Jones, has been notified of your arrival. Please disembark to begin your observation of human military tactics." Still, Zatric couldn't move. His people had a saying: the wise Sibber knows when to flow with the current and when to anchor in place. Right now, every instinct screamed at him to anchor, to remain in the relative safety of the ship's interior. His breathing sacs inflated and deflated rapidly, the Sibber equivalent of hyperventilation. "Hello?" a voice called from outside, distinctly human, carrying that particular casual tone that seemed endemic to their species. A knocking sound followed, 3 rhythmic raps against the ship's open doorway. The gesture seemed almost absurd, given that the hatch was already open, but Zatric had read that humans, at the very least, understood how to respect personal space. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall by Sibber standards, though average for a human male. The man wore military fatigues in a pattern of browns and greens that Zatric's eyes could see were designed to break up the human outline in multiple light spectrums. His skin was a shade that the humans called olive, and his hair was cut so short it barely existed. Most striking were his eyes, a brown so dark they seemed almost black, yet somehow conveying warmth rather than threat. "Ambassador Zatric, I'm Lieutenant Jones." The human stepped inside. "Do you need help with the seatbelts? Those automated systems can be tricky if you're not used to them." The offer of assistance triggered something in Zatrick. Not pride, actually, as Sibber didn't experience that emotion quite the same way humans did, but something similar. A determination not to appear completely helpless before this warrior species. With effort that felt monumental, he forced his webbed fingers to release the restraints. No assistance required, Lieutenant Jones," Zatrick managed, his voice emerging through the translator module in his suit as a slightly tinny but comprehensible sound. The Sibber vocal cords could produce sounds in ranges humans couldn't hear, so the translator was essential. "I am adjusting to the situation." He pressed the release mechanism and the seatbelts retracted. Standing proved to be another challenge. His legs trembled as they supported his weight. The exoskeleton provided some structural support, but couldn't entirely compensate for his fear-weakened muscles. "Greetings, Lieutenant Jones," Zatrick said, attempting the formal tone he'd practiced. He stood at his full height, roughly eye-level with the human's chest, and performed the Sibber gesture of respect, spreading his webbed fingers wide before bringing them together in front of his torso. "I must ask, is it safe to go outside? There won't be missiles falling on our heads?" Jones laughed, a sound that Zatrick had learned could indicate amusement, nervousness, or sometimes both. In this case, it seemed to be genuine amusement. "Ambassador, humanity has near full control of the skies here. There is very little chance of any sudden attack from above. Our aerospace forces and orbital platforms maintain constant surveillance. If any unauthorized ship approaches, we'd have warning, at least a few minutes before any possible strike. You'd hear the sirens first, see the red lights flashing across the entire base. Trust me, if there's danger from above, you'll know it with plenty of time to reach shelter." The explanation helped, though only marginally. Zatrick's spots darkened slightly, a sign of stress that most humans wouldn't recognize. Still, the concept of having warning, of there being systems in place, made the prospect of leaving the ship seem marginally less terrifying. I see. Then I shall accompany you, Lieutenant Jones." Zatrick moved toward the hatch, each step careful. "I am here to observe and learn, after all." Stepping outside the ship, Zatrick's sensory organs were immediately overwhelmed by the human military base. It sprawled across several square kilometers of relatively flat terrain, a perfect example of human engineering and military organization. The ground beneath his feet was a composite material, not quite concrete, not quite metal, but something that could withstand the heat of thruster landings and the weight of heavy equipment. Ships of various sizes were constantly landing and taking off, their designs purely functional rather than aesthetic. Human military vessels, Zatrick had noticed, seemed to embrace their mechanical nature rather than trying to hide it. Every surface bristled with weapons, sensors, or heat dissipation systems. The larger transports descended with thunderous roars that made Zatrick's whole body vibrate, while smaller craft zipped between designated landing zones. What surprised him most were the aircraft. Primitive by Galactic Council standards, using atmospheric engines rather than anti-gravity systems. These fixed-wing vehicles seemed almost antiquated, yet they moved with surprising speed. Several fighter jets screamed overhead in formation, the sound of their engines so loud that it nearly hurt his ears. "Impressive, isn't it?" Jones said, noticing Zatrick's reaction. "I know most Council species consider atmospheric aircraft primitive, but they're perfect for certain tactical situations. Cheaper to produce and maintain than anti-grav systems. Harder to detect with certain sensor types, and they can operate even when anti-grav jammers are deployed." Jones extended his hand toward Zatrick, who stared at it for a moment before remembering the human custom of handshaking. It was meant as a gesture of greeting and trust, historically showing that neither party held weapons. "Let me formally welcome you to our base, Ambassador. I'm Lieutenant Jones, 15th Colonial Defense Regiment. I'll be your guide to understanding human military tactics during your stay." Zatrick extended his own hand, careful to match the grip pressure as he'd been taught in his preparation briefings. The human's hand was warm and dry, with a grip that was firm but not crushing, though Zatrick suspected Jones was being deliberately gentle. Even so, the strength behind that grip was evident. a reminder that humans, despite lacking claws or natural armor, were persistence predators who had evolved to run prey to exhaustion. "Thank you for your welcome, Lieutenant Jones. I am Ambassador Zatrick of the Sibber Collective, though I suppose you already knew that." Jones smiled and gestured toward a ground vehicle parked nearby. It was clearly military in design, painted in the same camouflage pattern as Jones's uniform, with thick armor plating and wheels that looked capable of traversing any terrain. The vehicle had no visible weapons, but mounting points suggested they could be added quickly if needed. "This is our ride," Jones said, opening the passenger door for Zatrick. "Don't worry, it's completely safe. Armored against small arms fire and most explosive devices. Climate-controlled, too, so you'll be comfortable." Zatrick climbed in, noting how the seats were designed for human anatomy but adjustable enough to accommodate his different proportions. Jones took the driver's seat, starting the engine with a rumble that Zatrick felt through the vehicle's frame. As they drove through the base, Zatrick noticed they were passing through multiple security checkpoints. Each featured automated scanners, human guards, and what looked like weapons emplacements that could seal off sections of the base if needed. The organization was impressive, layers of security that would make any infiltration extremely difficult. It wasn't until they passed through the final checkpoint and Jones turned onto a rough road leading away from the base that Zatrick felt his fear spike again. "Lieutenant Jones," he said, his voice tight with anxiety, "where exactly are we going?" Jones glanced at him with that same easy smile. "First stop on our tour, Ambassador, an active bunker position in the combat zone. Best way to understand human tactics is to see them in action." Zatrick's spots turned almost black with fear. "An active combat zone? But the Galactic Council assured me." "That you'd be safe," Jones finished, "and you will be. That bunker has never been successfully breached. Trust me, Ambassador, you're about to see exactly why humans win wars so quickly." The journey took them through increasingly militarized terrain. Barricades and fences created a maze-like approach to their destination, forcing any vehicle to slow down and navigate carefully. Zatrick realized this was intentional, creating kill zones where any attacking force would be vulnerable. Automated turrets tracked their vehicle, even though it was broadcasting friendly identification signals. Finally, Jones stopped the vehicle in front of a heavy metal door set into what looked like a small hill but was actually an artificial mound of earth and concrete. "Move quickly when I open the door," Jones instructed, "not because of immediate danger, but because we don't like to leave entry points open longer than necessary." Zatrick's fear paralyzed him for only a moment before Jones's expectant look spurred him into action. He scrambled from the vehicle and through the door that Jones had opened, finding himself in a world of concrete and metal. The bunker's interior was purely functional. No decoration, no comfort considerations beyond the basic needs of the soldiers stationed there. The walls were reinforced concrete at least a meter thick, with steel support beams creating a grid pattern overhead. 8 openings, firing positions, were cut into the far wall, each one carefully angled to provide maximum field of fire while minimizing exposure to return fire. At each position stood a soldier operating what Zatrick could only describe as an excessive weapon. Multi-barreled, rotating guns that looked capable of unleashing devastating amounts of firepower. The weapons were fed by massive ammunition containers and cooling systems vented heat through specialized ports. "These are some of our cadets," Jones explained, his voice carrying the authority of rank. "Third-year military academy, here for practical experience." The young soldiers, and they were young, Zatrick realized, barely adults by human standards, immediately straightened at the lieutenant's presence. Their movements were synchronized, trained, automatic. "At ease, cadets. Return to your duties," Jones commanded, then pointed to one soldier whose name tag read Garcia. "Cadet Garcia, could you spare a moment to explain your position to our guest? This is Ambassador Zatrick from the Galactic Council." Garcia, a young woman with skin darker than Jones's and hair tied in a tight bun, nodded crisply. "Of course, sir." She turned to Zatrick, her expression professional but curious. "Ambassador, what would you like to know about our position?" Zatrick's fear made his voice emerge more panicked than he intended. "Why would you build this place? Any aerial strike could destroy this bunker. You're sitting in what humans would call a death trap, are you not? Garcia blinked, seeming momentarily confused by the question. Well, yes, sir. A direct orbital bombardment or heavy aerial strike could destroy this position, but that's not what it's designed to defend against. This bunker is for ground defense, not anti-aerial operations. Zatric's confusion must have shown even through his alien features, because Garcia looked to Jones for help. Jones stepped in smoothly. Perhaps I should explain the broader context, Ambassador. Do you know who our enemies are in this particular conflict? Space pirates, according to my briefing, Zatric replied, grateful for something he actually knew. Specifically, a group calling themselves the Travelers, Jones elaborated. They're nomadic raiders, a mixed species group that targets isolated colonies. They decided this planet would make a good target. Far from major fleet positions, relatively new settlement, valuable agricultural development. They hit us hard initially with an orbital bombardment followed by ground assault. Jones gestured to the bunker around them. Positions like this aren't meant to withstand orbital bombardment. For that, we rely on our space forces and aerospace fighters to maintain air superiority. As long as they do their jobs, and they're very good at their jobs, no bombs fall on our heads. This bunker exists to stop ground infiltration. The level of specialization and trust involved staggered Zatric. You trust others completely with your aerial defense while you focus solely on ground threats? That is one of the foundations of human military strategy, Jones confirmed. Well-defined, specialized roles allow each element to excel at their specific task. It's part of why we win wars quickly. No one wastes time trying to do everything. But why this bunker specifically? Zatric pressed, still not fully understanding. Garcia jumped back in, seemingly more confident now. After their initial assault failed, the pirates shifted tactics. They can't match us in direct combat. We broke their main force in the first week. Now they're using guerrilla tactics, stealth raids on farms and supply depots. This position, and others like it, create a defensive perimeter around the valley's agricultural center. Suddenly, one of the other cadets held up a hand, pressing their communication device tighter to their ear. Thermal drones have contact. 8 heat signatures approaching from Sector 7, moving through the ravine system. The bunker transformed instantly. What had been a relatively calm educational environment became a hurricane of controlled activity. Soldiers rushed to their positions, weapon systems activated with a sound that made Zatric's internal organs vibrate. Don't panic, Ambassador, Jones said calmly, placing a steadying hand on what would be Zatric's shoulder. You're perfectly safe. Just observe. This will be more educational than any explanation I could give. The multi-barreled guns began spinning, a mechanical whir that grew louder as they reached optimal rotation speed. Then, as if controlled by a single mind, all 8 positions opened fire simultaneously. The sound was beyond description. Zatric had heard of human weapons, had even seen recordings, but experiencing it in person was entirely different. Each gun fired hundreds of rounds per minute, creating a continuous stream of projectiles that lit up the air with tracer rounds. The noise was a physical force, pressing against his body even through his protective suit. What struck Zatric most was the sheer excess of it. The guns didn't fire in short bursts to conserve ammunition. They maintained continuous fire for minutes at a time, pausing only for bare seconds to allow cooling systems to engage before resuming their metallic storm. Shell casings rained down in brass waterfalls, creating growing piles beneath each position. The cadets showed no concern for ammunition conservation. They fired at maximum rate, sweeping their assigned sectors. The amount of metal they put downrange in just the first minute would have supplied a cyber defense position for a month. "Target down!" someone called out. "One confirmed kill, thermal signature eliminated." "Others are retreating," another voice added. "They're pulling back to Sector 12." The guns continued firing for another full minute, pursuing the fleeing enemies with streams of bullets that carved through vegetation and earthworks alike. Only when the order came to cease fire did the weapons finally spin down, leaving an almost painful silence in their wake. Zatric's ears, or rather the auditory membranes along his neck, rang with the aftermath. The air smelled of heated metal and chemical propellant. Spent casings covered the floor ankle-deep in places. "That," Zatrick began, his voice shaky, "that was incredibly wasteful. You must have fired thousands of rounds to eliminate one enemy and drive off 7 others." Jones actually laughed. "Tens of thousands, actually, and yes, you're right. It might seem wasteful, but that's part of the strategy." "I don't understand," Zatrick admitted, his fear slowly being replaced by bewilderment. "The show of overwhelming firepower destroys enemy morale," Jones explained. "Those 7 pirates who escaped, they'll tell others what happened. They'll spread the word that attacking human positions means facing a wall of lead. Fear is a weapon, Ambassador, and we wield it through superior firepower. It's another reason we win wars quickly. Enemies learn fast that fighting us means facing ammunition expenditure that defies reason." "But the cost," Zatrick protested. "Is less than you might think," Jones said. He pulled out a holopad from a small table near the command position, bringing up a tactical display. "Let me show you something." The display revealed a topographical map of the surrounding area. Jones pointed to their current position, one of 4 similar bunkers surrounding a vast valley filled with agricultural development. "This is about logistics, Ambassador. One of humanity's greatest military innovations isn't a weapon. It's supply chain management. Those transport ships you saw landing at the base, they bring ammunition from orbital supply stations. Those stations are supplied by cargo vessels from regional depots. Those depots are supplied by industrial worlds dedicated entirely to military production." Jones zoomed out of the display, showing the star system and supply routes. "We have entire star systems, not just planets, but entire systems, dedicated to producing ammunition, weapons, fuel, and supplies. The industrial output is staggering. What you just witnessed, that expenditure of ammunition that seems so wasteful, we can sustain that level of firepower indefinitely." "How much does it cost?" Zatrick asked, his multifaceted eyes widening. "More than most species' entire military budgets," Jones admitted freely. "But here's the secret, Ambassador. It's worth it. Wars are equations with 3 main variables: money, intelligence, and lives. Every species in the Galactic Council tries to balance these 3. Humans, we decided long ago that lives were the most valuable variable, so we compensate by dramatically oversupplying the other 2. Jones pulled up production statistics that made Zatrick's minds reel. The Cyber had 3 brains, one for motor control, one for conscious thought, and one for memory processing, and all 3 struggled to comprehend the numbers. "At any given moment," Jones continued, "humanity has more bullets stockpiled than we could fire in a decade of continuous warfare. We have fuel reserves that could run our entire fleet for years. Food, medical supplies, replacement parts, everything needed to sustain combat operations indefinitely. And more importantly, we have the logistics network to deliver these supplies anywhere in human space within days or weeks." "But maintaining such supply lines during war," Zatrick began, "is our highest priority," Jones confirmed. "Our supply convoys are more heavily defended than some species' capital ships. We learned thousands of years ago, in wars on Earth, that the army with the best supply lines usually wins. An enemy might have superior technology or tactics, but if they run out of ammunition, fuel, or food, they lose. Humans never run out." Garcia, who had been listening, added her own perspective. "In the Academy, they teach us that every round fired represents a whole chain of human effort. Miners extracted the raw materials, factory workers processed and shaped them, logistics specialists transported them across light years. All so that when I pull this trigger, I don't have to worry about running out of ammunition. I can focus entirely on my job defending this position." "It's specialization taken to an extreme," Jones said. "I don't worry about ammunition production. The factory workers don't worry about combat tactics. The transport crews don't worry about either. They just move material from point A to point B. Everyone does their specific job, trusts others to do theirs, and the whole system works like a massive, perfectly coordinated organism." Zatrick stood in contemplation, his mind processing this fundamentally different approach to warfare. The Galactic Council species, his own included, tried to be efficient with resources. They calculated the minimum amount of firepower needed for each engagement. They preserved ammunition for critical moments. They tried to be clever, to be precise. Humans simply bought more bullets. "You're starting to understand," Jones observed, watching Zatric's expression, or whatever the equivalent was for a Sibber. "It's not elegant, it's not efficient in the traditional sense, but it works. When pirates attack, we don't calculate the precise amount of force needed. We apply overwhelming force immediately. When enemies set up defense positions, we don't devise clever ways around them. We flatten them with artillery barrages that turn mountains into valleys." "The travelers," Garcia added, "came here with what they thought was sufficient ammunition for a 3-month campaign. They exhausted most of it in the first 2 weeks. Now they're reduced to scavenging and raiding because their supply situation is critical. Meanwhile, we've used more ammunition in the last month than they brought for their entire campaign, and our supply levels have actually increased because production is outpacing consumption." Jones brought up another display showing the economic infrastructure supporting the war effort. "The Galactic Council always wondered how humanity could afford such short wars when other species struggled with protracted conflicts. The answer is that we front-load the cost. We spend enormously on preparation and infrastructure. A single human ammunition factory costs more to build and maintain than some species spend on their entire military. But when war comes, we don't have to ration. We don't have to hesitate. We can apply the maximum force from day one and maintain it until the enemy breaks." "And they always break," Garcia said with quiet confidence. "No one can match our logistics. They might win battles when they catch us off guard, but once our supply lines are established, it's only a matter of time." Zatric spent the next several hours in that bunker, learning more about human military doctrine. Jones showed him supply manifests that defied belief. Single transport ships carrying more ammunition than the entire Sibber military possessed. He explained redundancy systems where 3 separate supply routes existed for every critical material, ensuring that even if 2 were disrupted, the third would maintain the flow of resources. He learned about the human concept of fire superiority, the idea that whoever could put the most projectiles downrange the fastest usually won the engagement. It wasn't about accuracy, though humans were certainly capable of precision when needed. It was about creating a volume of fire that enemy movement became impossible, enemy positions became untenable, and enemy morale crumbled. "We studied the Carillon hegemony's defeat at Zorak Station," Jones said at one point. "They had better shields, better armor, better weapons technology, but they brought ammunition for a surgical strike. When it turned into a slugfest, they ran dry after 6 hours. Human forces were still firing at the same rate after 60 hours. The hegemony had to retreat, not because they were defeated, but because they literally couldn't shoot back anymore." The lieutenant showed Zatric footage from various human conflicts, each demonstrating the same principle. Enemies would engage expecting a typical exchange of fire, only to face a tsunami of projectiles that never seemed to end. Artillery barrages that continued for days. Aerial bombardments that turned forests into moonscapes. Space battles where human ships fired missiles like they were going out of style, because from a human perspective, ammunition was essentially infinite. "But surely," Zatric said at one point, "there must be enemies who have adopted similar tactics, who have tried to match your production capacity." Jones nodded. "A few have tried. The more techie attempted it about 40 years ago. They restructured their entire economy to match our ammunition production. It bankrupted them in 18 months. They didn't understand that humanity has been building this infrastructure for centuries. We didn't create it for a specific space war. We created it as the foundation of our military doctrine. It's not something you can quickly replicate." As the hours passed, Zatric's fear gradually transformed into a different emotion. Awe mixed with a kind of horrified respect. The human approach to warfare was so fundamentally different from anything in the Galactic Council's experience. Where other species thought elegant solutions, humans simply overwhelmed positions with resources. You know what the real secret is? Jones said as they finally prepared to leave the bunker. It's not just that we have more bullets. It's that our enemies know we have more bullets, and they know we're willing to use them all. That psychological impact is worth more than any tactical advantage. When you're facing an enemy who treats ammunition like water in an ocean, who can maintain maximum fire indefinitely, who has supply lines stretching back to entire industrial star systems, how do you fight that? You don't. You surrender or you run. As they walked back to the vehicle, Zatrick noticed something he'd missed on arrival. Stacked beside the bunker entrance were pallets of ammunition crates, more than the bunker had used in the entire engagement, just sitting there, waiting. "Tomorrow's supply," Jones explained, noting his gaze. "We'll receive the same amount tomorrow, whether we use it or not, and the day after, and the day after that." The ride back to the base was quiet, Zatrick processing everything he'd learned. His mission had been to discover how humans won wars so quickly. The answer was simpler and more complex than he'd imagined, simply because it came down to basic resource overwhelming. Complex because the infrastructure required to support such a strategy was mind-boggling. As they approached the main gate, Jones spoke one more time. "The Galactic Council thinks in terms of minimizing cost. Humans think in terms of minimizing casualties. We learned long ago that it's cheaper to fire 1,000,000 rounds than to lose a single soldier. It's more economical to expend a fortune in ammunition than to pay the political and social cost of casualties. So yes, we bring more bullets. We bring more of everything. And we keep bringing it until the other side gives up." "And they always give up," Zatrick said, understanding finally dawning. "They always give up," Jones confirmed, "because they run out of ammunition or fuel or food or will. We never run out of any of those things. We make sure of it." Zatrick stood at the boarding ramp of his ship, his mission complete. His whole body still trembled, but now it was from exhaustion rather than fear. The day spent with Lieutenant Jones had been overwhelming in ways he hadn't anticipated. He understood now what the Galactic Council had failed to grasp. It wasn't that humans had better weapons or tactics. It wasn't that they were braver or stronger. It was that they had approached the entire concept of warfare from a fundamentally different angle. The Council species, his own Sibber included, treated war as an unfortunate necessity that should be conducted as efficiently as possible. Minimize expenditure, maximize tactical advantage, seek elegant solutions. It was civilized, it was rational, it was completely inadequate against the human approach. Humans treated war as an industrial problem. They didn't seek efficiency, they sought overwhelming supremacy. They didn't calculate minimum necessary force, they calculated maximum deliverable force, and then doubled it. They didn't worry about waste because they had redefined waste itself. To a human military planner, 1,000,000 unused bullets wasn't waste, it was insurance. "Ambassador," Jones said, offering his hand for a final handshake, "I hope your observation was educational." "More than you know, Lieutenant," Zatrick replied, accepting the handshake with his webbed fingers. "I believe I understand now why human colonies remain secure while others face constant threats." Jones smiled. "It's not complicated, really. We just never let anyone else dictate the terms of engagement. When someone brings a knife to a fight, we bring a gun. When they bring a gun, we bring a battalion. When they bring a battalion, you bring an entire star system's worth of ammunition production," Zatrick finished. "Exactly." As Zatrick settled into his ship's seat, preparing for departure, he began composing his report to the Galactic Council. He would explain the human doctrine of overwhelming firepower, the logistics networks that spanned star systems, the industrial base dedicated entirely to producing implements of war. But more importantly, he would explain the philosophy behind it. Humans didn't win wars quickly because they were better at fighting. They won because they removed fighting from the equation entirely, replacing it with simple, overwhelming material superiority. They turned warfare from an art into assembly line production. Humans had decided that lives were infinitely valuable, so they made the other variables effectively infinite as well. It was wasteful, expensive, and utterly devastating to any force that tried to oppose them with conventional military thinking. The ship's computer engaged the hyperdrive, and stars stretched into lines as Zatrick headed home with his answer. The Council had wanted to know how Earth won its wars so quickly. The answer was simpler than they'd imagined, and more terrible than they feared. Humanity had turned warfare into a problem of logistics and industrial production, and in that realm, no other species could compete with the descendants of persistence hunters who had learned to shape their entire world to their will. They didn't just bring more bullets, they brought the entire weight of human civilization to bear on anyone foolish enough to threaten them. And they could sustain that weight indefinitely. That was how Earth won its wars so fast. They simply refused to run out of ammunition.